So our next speaker is Chris Cooke, and his presentation is called Distribution Revolution. And Chris is an editor, journalist, and media entrepreneur. He's the co-founder and managing director of CMU, Complete Music Update, and that's a company that helps people and labels navigate and understand the music business. In the presentation, Distribution Revolution, Chris talks through the evolution of digital distribution and discusses the options artists and labels now have when picking a distribution partner. So Chris, thanks for being here with us today, and the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and then I will take some questions. I seem to be very well lit here today. I don't quite know why I'm looking so orange. It may be that the orange slide that you're currently seeing is reflecting in my face. So if I'm glowing, I apologise for that. This is quite interesting. As you can imagine, over the last year, I've done an awful lot of online presentations, which is kind of new. But I haven't done so many like this, where I'm online, but you're in a real room. So it's we're slowly adjusting to the new world. So yes, as you were just told, my name is Chris Cooke, and I run a company here in the UK, in London, called CMU, and we exist to help people navigate and understand the music business, and we do that in a number of different ways. So it was mentioned that I'm a journalist, so we report on the music industry through our media. We have a daily bulletin that goes out by email called the CMU Daily, we have a weekly podcast called Setlist, we have a website, where we basically cover all the big developments in the music business. We have a UK bias, but we also cover the big stories in the US and across Europe and elsewhere as well. As well as our media, we also do lots of training courses on the music business, on copyright, on licensing, on digital, on social, on marketing, etc. We do lots of events about the music business, our own events and other events, and we present at events like this. And then we also do lots of research reports. So we work with a number of different companies and music industry organisations on our research. That includes a partnership that we have with Impala. So we have a programme with Impala called One Step Ahead, where we publish reports every 2 or 3 months on big developments and issues and challenges and opportunities in the digital music industry. So we have published reports on playlisting and curation, and on data and marketing, and on the diversifying digital market, and our latest report is on all the big digital music debates. Although today, I'm actually here to talk to you about a piece of research that we did here in the UK with the Association of Independent Music. So that's the Independent Communities Trade Organisation here in the UK. And that report was called Distribution Revolution. And the aim of the report was to basically provide an overview of the music distribution market today. Because music distribution has changed a lot over the last 20 years, partly, obviously, with the shift from distributors primarily getting physical discs into record shops, to distributors basically becoming the interface between labels, artists, and the streaming services. But also the role of the distributor has changed as well, both in terms of the services that the distributor provides and the kinds of clients that the distributor works with. So the aim of this report, which you can download for free, was to basically provide an overview of music distribution, summarise the changes that have happened, why they happened, and then also, for those of you who are labels looking for a distribution partner to work with, to provide some advice on what you should be considering when picking a distribution partner and negotiating a distribution deal. So that's what Distribution Revolution covers, and today, in the next 20 minutes, I'm basically going to give you a 5-step guide to what the report talks about. So let's go through these 5 steps, and then I'll answer any questions that you may have. So step number 1, which is digital services want to license as much content as possible through as few deals as possible. And I suppose, as an outsider looking in to the music industry and to the record industry, I think it's easy for anybody to understand why, in the physical era, when we were releasing physical discs, why most independent labels, and in some countries major labels too, would look to third parties, business partners, to actually get their music to market, to get their vinyl records, their cassettes, their CDs into record shops. It's easy to understand the logistical challenge of moving physical product around any one country, let alone around the world. And that is why most independent labels would rely on a distributor, which might be another label that had built a distribution infrastructure, or it would be a standalone music distribution business to get their physical product into record shops. However, as an outsider looking in, you might say, well, hang on a second, I understand why there's a logistical challenge with physical discs, but surely with digital, it's as simple as uploading a WAV file to somebody's server. Why do you need a business partner to help with digital distribution? Well, there are various reasons why, which I'm going to talk about here today, but this is one of the big reasons. Digital services, whether we're talking about the Apple iTunes Store back in the day, or we're talking about Spotify and Deezer and Apple Music today, or we're talking about YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and Triller, all of these services want to access as much music as they can by negotiating deals with as few businesses and licensing entities as possible. And in the very early days of digital, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, this created a challenge for the independent music community, because what most of the early digital services did was they went to the majors, of which at the time there were 5. They would negotiate their deals with the majors, and then they would launch, and then they would go to the independent community and say, okay, do you want in? And if so, these are our deals. So the fact that digital services didn't want to have to negotiate deals, bespoke deals, with hundreds of thousands of independent labels, let alone independently releasing artists, it gave the majors an advantage, because the majors were sitting on big catalogs. So, what was the independent community going to do about that? And this was a big talking point. You know, if we'd been doing this conference 20 years ago, this is what we would have been talking about. Now, the independent community came up with 2 potential solutions. One was collective bargaining, and the other was aggregation. So, collective bargaining basically saw independent labels come together, often through trade organisations like AIM in the UK, forming a committee that would then go to the services and say, well, why don't we agree basic terms, negotiate how it will work, together as a committee. We will represent an assortment of independent labels, and then once we have a deal that we're happy with, we will take that deal to all of the labels that we represent and see if they want to opt in. So that was a collective bargaining approach. The other approach was more commercial, in that you had entrepreneurs who recognized there was a gap in the market. And if they could go up and sign up the rights of independent labels, aggregate the rights, they could then go to the digital services and say, okay, through the aggregation deals I have done, I'm actually now sitting on a pretty big catalogue of music, so you should negotiate with me. And so these were the approaches that we started to see being employed in the early to mid 2000s as download stores and then subsequently streaming services started to come to market. And basically, the collective bargaining approach morphed into Merlin, which you're going to hear more about in a moment. So Merlin is an organisation that licenses on behalf of a consortium of independent labels and distributors with the services. And across Merlin's membership, you have a significant catalogue of content, significant artists, significant releases, so that if you're launching a digital music service today, in the same way, you know, assuming you want a global mainstream service with a big catalogue of music, you can't come to market without the majors, you can't come to market without doing a deal with Merlin. So the collective bargaining approach was ultimately formalised into Merlin. Meanwhile, those aggregators became what today we tend to refer to as digital distributors. And most of the early digital distributors were entrepreneurs, they were startup businesses. It's true that the companies that have traditionally done physical distribution did subsequently move into digital. Meanwhile, these digital aggregators moved into physical distribution. But early on, it was generally startup businesses, and they became, you know, some of the big digital music distributors today. So, if we are thinking about this from a 2021 perspective, if you are a label, a rights holder, you have a catalogue of recordings, whether that's a few recordings, a few hundred recordings, a few thousand recordings, and you want to get your music onto the streaming services, you basically have 3 options open to you, 2 of which are the ones I've already explained, the modern versions of the ones I've already explained. The third option is that you could try and do a direct deal, but it's more likely that you're going to opt into a Merlin deal, or you're going to work with a music distributor. But let's just quickly talk about direct deals. The challenge with direct deals, first and foremost, is that it is still true, 20 years on, that most digital music services, most streaming services, want to get as much music as they can through as few deals as possible. So if you wanted to go the direct deal route, the first question is, well, would a streaming service even come to the negotiating table? Now, you might have certain artists or recordings in your catalogue which, in your market, are really important. And maybe you could use that to get to the negotiating table. But in many cases, you couldn't. Then there is this other question, the second question on this slide. Would you even want to go to the negotiating table? And this is another reason why having partners, whether that's Merlin or a distributor, is generally the way that most people work it. Because digital deals are incredibly complicated. It's not as straightforward as saying to a record shop, you take 50 CDs, this is the wholesale price, is there sale or return, and that's basically it. Whereas digital licensing deals are very complicated, and you need quite a lot of expertise to negotiate them. And that is one of the reasons why streaming services don't want to have to negotiate bespoke deals with every single independent label, let alone every single self-releasing artist. Because negotiating with people who don't understand how digital licensing works is very, very difficult. Whereas if you're working with someone who understands how digital licensing works, then at least you understand the framework of the deal and what you've got to negotiate. And again, that's another way that Merlin, in essence, is providing a service to the streaming companies as well as a service to its label and distributor members, in that it knows how digital licensing works. So services would prefer to negotiate with someone who understands how the deals work. So even if you could get a streaming service to the negotiating table, are you in a position to negotiate? And of course, even if you could negotiate a deal, you would still need to get your recordings and all of the other assets into the platforms of the services. So, option 2, more realistic, is the Merlin approach. So with Merlin, Merlin negotiates a template deal on behalf of its members. Its members are both labels and distributors. Because Merlin has a large catalogue it represents, because Merlin are experts in negotiating licensing deals, Merlin can usually secure terms for its members, on par with what the majors are securing. I mean, when it comes to things like advances and things like that, or equity share, those are usually distributed on a market share basis. But in terms of the elements of the deal, Merlin is, tough in its negotiations. As a Merlin member, you can opt into deals or not, depending on which ones you want to use and which ones you don't want to use. If you are using a Merlin deal, Merlin then processes any money and data that comes back from the streaming services. But really important point here, it doesn't deliver your content. It is not a distributor. So you would still need to handle the delivery of your content yourself. Now, there are companies that sell that as a service. So there are companies like CI and Fuga, who will provide content delivery to Merlin members. So they're not distributing, not being a distributor in the true sense, in that they're not doing all of the other things that I'm going to talk about as part of music distribution, but they are delivering your content to Spotify and Apple and Amazon, etc. And although earlier I said from outside looking in, you might think, well, the delivery stage, that's just uploading a WAV file. It's not as simple as just uploading a WAV file. Every streaming service has slightly different requirements. There's all the metadata that you need to provide, and that metadata is constantly changing. Also, when things like TikTok come along, where you're actually taking snippets of recordings rather than full recordings, that creates new challenges. And so a delivery partner like CI or Fuga will also be dealing with all of those challenges. The third option is to work with a distributor. A distributor will either negotiate deals directly because they have a big enough catalogue and enough expertise to do that, Or some distributors actually are using Merlin deals as well. Some distributors will have some direct deals and some Merlin deals. But a distributor is bringing everything to the table. It is negotiating the deal, or it is opting into a Merlin deal, it is processing all the royalties and data, and crucially, it is handling content delivery. So, those are the three options. You either go for a direct deal, or you go for a Merlin deal, or you use a distributor. And I guess with each of those options, as we move our way up, from direct deal to Merlin deal to distributor, as a label it gets easier. There's less work for you to do. It may well be the direct deal is not even an option because you can't get to the negotiating table, you're not in a position to negotiate a deal. Merlin is easy because Merlin has a seat at the negotiating table. It knows how to license the content, but you would still need to do delivery. Or you work with a distributor who does everything for you. So you know, as you go up that chain, the workload on your part, the expertise required on your part goes down. But of course, as you work your way up that chain, you're also giving up a share of the money. So if you're doing a direct deal, in essence, you don't have to share that money with everybody. I mean, you have to deliver the content, you have to pay lawyers to negotiate the deal. So there are some quite big upfront costs, even if you could go that route. But once it's up and running, you would keep all the money. Whereas if you go the Merlin route, Merlin charges a nominal commission, 1.5 to 3% on the revenue, plus you would probably be paying for delivery. If you work with a distributor, they will be taking a commission of any revenue, and depending on what other services you are taking from your distributor, it could be anything from 10% to 50% of the money. So those are the options that are available today. Which option is the easiest? Which option is the most cost efficient? These are things you need to consider. And basically, it's a play-off between the ease of the approach and the cost of the approach. Although it's worth remembering that a distributor might bring other services to the table beyond true distribution, which brings us to step 3. Another big change over the last 20 years is that distributors have greatly expanded the range of services they now offer their clients. So if you go the distributor route, obviously you would expect your content to be delivered and your metadata to be delivered by your distributor. You would expect the distributor to either have deals with the services or to be using Merlin deals. You would expect the distributor to be processing the usage data and the royalties as it comes back and all the payments. That is what you would be expecting if you were working with a distributor. But many distributors now offer other services as well. This actually had already begun before the digital age. Some physical distributors had started to move into sales and marketing. But many distribution companies now will also help with things like pitching your music to streaming services, pitching to playlists, pitching to editorial opportunities, what we might call B2B marketing. They may also help you process all of that data and pull analytics and insight out of that data so that you can inform your marketing based on the data you are seeing from the streaming services and elsewhere. Some distributors will bring other marketing to the table. They will create content, they will do influencer marketing, they will do PR, reaching out to media. And some distributors will basically provide all the services that a label could possibly need. And there are some distributors who provide so many services that they are basically doing everything that the label needs to do other than A&O. So when you're working with a distributor today, you could simply take distribution from the distributor. Indeed, if you already have your deals sorted through Merlin, you can simply take content delivery from a distributor. CI exists exclusively to provide that service. Fuga will provide that service standalone. Or you could take everything else on this slide from Fuga. So that's an example of a business where everything is available and you really can pick and choose. And with other distributors, the aggregation element will be taken as a given, but then are there distribution services, are there marketing services, are there other services? Now obviously as a label, the question is, which of these services do you need and what are you willing to give up? Because of course, the more services you take, the more fees the distributor is going to want in return. Because most distributors work on a commission basis, basically the commission rate goes up. So if you are getting simple aggregation, then you can probably get that on a 10% commission. Indeed, if if you work for the TuneCore or a CD Baby, which some really small indies do, well, not CD Baby actually, but with TuneCore, you can pay an upfront fee and get 100% of the money. But the more services you take, the bigger cut the distributor is going to want. So once the distributor is managing your relationships with the services, pitching your music to the services, you're more likely to be looking at 20, maybe 30% of revenue. And once you start taking marketing services and content services and neighborhood rights services and sync services, anywhere up to 50% of the money. So that's the decision you need to make. If you're going the distributor route, and if you're working with a distributor that can provide all these other services, which services do you need, and what are you willing to give up in return? There's also one other thing to think about, which is the other big trend that we have seen in music distribution over the last 15 years, is that not only have distributors expanded their range of services, they have also expanded their range of clients. What I mean by that is that it used to be that distributors predominantly and actually exclusively worked for labels. So an artist would sign to a label, the label wanted to get its music to market, and so it would work with a distributor. But we know that over the last 15 years, we've started to see artists basically set up their own label and then directly hire the services of the distributor. So some distributors now work with artists, usually in partnership with the artist management team, as well as labels. And of course, we have those distributors like TuneCore and CD Baby and Ditto and DistroKid that predominantly work with artists, including bedroom self-releasing DIY artists. So distributors still work for labels, but a lot of distributors now also work directly for artists, which creates an interesting question, because it means that your distributor, an incredibly important trusted business partner, is now also potentially a competitor when it comes to signing artists. And if you take every service a distributor can offer, and you're happy with the commission they want to charge in return for that, there is the question to be asked, well, hang on a second, the biggest artist on my label will know that the distributor is actually doing all the marketing and all of the sync work and all the naming rights work. Is there a risk that when my current deal with the artist expires, the artist and management might say, well, maybe we set up our own label, and maybe we go and work with the distributor directly? So it's an interesting dilemma for both labels and distributors, that companies that used to exclusively work for labels do now also work directly for artists. So how you navigate that is a challenge on both sides. There are pros and cons from an artist perspective in working with a distributor instead of a label. Generally speaking, working with a distributor from an artist perspective means the artist gets to keep more of the rights and more of the revenue. But the flip side is, even if it looks like a distributor is going to do all the work with a label, are they really going to do all the work with a label? And often, actually, they are not. So from an artist's perspective, there are pros and cons, but as a label, it's worth being aware of that trend. And finally, if you are a label looking to pick a distribution partner, or a self-releasing artist looking to pick a distribution partner, there are obviously many things to think about. And I'm just going to show you the list now. But in the Distribution Revolution report, we talk about each of these in more detail. So you need to think about price. Do you want and can you get an advance from a distributor to help with either advancing an artist or doing some marketing? What is the commitment and reach of your distribution deal? How will you get content from the distributor? How will they get data back to you? What services do they offer? What services do you want? And then things like, do they have genre or regional expertise that is attractive to you? Do they have good relationships with the streaming services? Do they do physical distribution? Is that important to you? What is their scale? What are the key people? Also, are they truly independent? Now, this may or may not matter to you, but you'll be aware that the majors all have distribution businesses, what they might now call label services businesses, artist services businesses. There's all different ways of saying the same thing. And an interesting question is, as an independent label, is it important to you that your distributor is also independent, or are you happy to work with a major distributor because you think there are benefits to doing so? Finally, other things to think about when working with distributors is how much transparency is there in the supply chain and how much information can your distributor, will your distributor give you? What's going to happen if and when you decide to leave your distributor? That can be tricky. Does that need to be included in the upfront deal? The issue around distributors being both partners and competitors, and also sometimes distributors need to be careful in managing expectations as to quite how many services they are actually able to offer. And these are talking points when you're negotiating with a distributor. They are also talking points for the independent community to have as music distribution continues to evolve. That brings us to the end of this presentation. I think we have a few minutes left for questions, if anyone has any questions. In the meantime, I will leave these boxes on the screen. These are links where you can download the slides I presented here today, or you can download the report, or you can sign up to our CMU bulletin and our CMU podcast. So I'll hand back to somebody in the room in case there are any questions. We've got about 3 minutes, I think.
Right, yeah, so are there any questions? Doesn't look like it, so Chris, thank you very much. It was a wonderful and short presentation, and we will definitely send out to the participants lists the resources that you were mentioning. So thank you very much for being with us.
And thank you very much for having me. And sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but the COVID rules are slowly relaxing, so hopefully next time maybe I can come and meet you all. But have a good rest of the day. Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. Download the report, sign up to CMU, and I hope to see you all again very soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.